His weathered hands trembled as he unfolded the crisp hotel statement. Derek sat alone at the kitchen table, evening light casting long shadows across the polished wood where they'd shared thousands of meals. The familiar scent of coffee mingled with the salt of tears he couldn't hold back. A receipt for a room upgrade for two, when Sarah had insisted she needed to find herself alone in Bali. If betrayal has ever stolen your breath like this, share your story below. Like if this moment feels familiar, follow to see how Derek finds his dignity when everything else is lost. The wedding photo on the sideboard caught his eye. Younger faces, genuine smiles, promises meant to last decades. A single tear splashed onto the statement, blurring the damning evidence as his throat constricted around a sob. His fingers crushed the paper's edge as 50 years of trust crumbled in seconds. Outside, a car door slammed, jolting him from his grief with a different kind of dread. Derek paused at the threshold of his den, the light switch flickering reluctantly to life. 57 years of living in this house, and still the wiring acted up. The familiar scent of coffee lingered from his morning ritual, now gone cold in the forgotten mug on his desk. His gaze settled on an envelope, its pristine white surface standing out against the weathered oak. Strange. He'd already collected today's mail. The floorboards creaked beneath his weight, a sound as familiar as his own heartbeat. Dust motes danced in the late afternoon sunlight, streaming through lace curtains Sarah had hung decades ago. The grandfather clock in the corner marked each second with relentless precision, amplifying the silence of the empty house. His fingers grazed the envelope, hesitating before lifting it. No postmark, just his name in what appeared to be Sarah's handwriting. Opening it revealed a statement from the Women's Association where she volunteered as treasurer. Something about the numbers caught his practiced eye, discrepancies he couldn't immediately place, but that triggered the same instinct that had served him well during 40 years in financial investigation. Not right. Something's not right here. A photograph on the bookshelf caught his eye. Their grandchildren at the lake last summer, Sarah surrounded by laughing little ones. Sunday dinners with family gathered around their table, Sarah's famous apple pie, the trust built over a lifetime together. His throat tightened unexpectedly. The first sob caught him by surprise, rising from somewhere deep inside his chest. His knees weakened, forcing him to lower himself into his reading chair. The statement trembled in his hands as tears blurred the figures that suddenly seemed to accuse not just financial impropriety, but something deeper, more personal. "Can't be," he whispered, his voice cracking like brittle autumn leaves. He pressed a hand to his chest where a physical ache had formed, each heartbeat pushing against the pressure of betrayal too enormous to comprehend. His head shook slowly in denial as another sob hitched his breathing. Derek clutched the frame holding the grandchildren's photo, thumb tracing their innocent smiles. Those kids worshipped their grandmother. What would this mean for them? For the legacy he and Sarah had built together? A tear splashed onto the statement, smudging one of the numbers. Derek blinked, focusing through the grief. The smudge revealed something, an alteration in the document, visible only because his tear had diluted the ink. His investigator's mind clicked into gear despite the emotional storm. Someone had changed the figures, and from the placement on the page, it wasn't just a simple correction. He wiped his eyes with the handkerchief Sarah always teased him about carrying. "Such an old-fashioned man," she'd say with affection. The moisture revealed more discrepancies, suspicious patterns his trained eye couldn't ignore. The betrayal taking shape wasn't just about their marriage, was it? A soft knock at the front door startled him from his thoughts. Derek glanced up, suddenly aware of how vulnerable he must look, friend or foe waiting outside. Either way, he wasn't ready to be seen like this, tear-stained and shaken to his core. Derek wiped his eyes with the back of his hand, rising unsteadily from his chair. The knock came again, more insistent this time. He tucked the statement into his pocket, a weight heavier than the paper itself. Not now. Whoever stood on his porch would have to wait. He reached for the phone instead, dialing his brother Michael's number from memory. 3 rings, then 4. The evening shadows lengthened across the den as dusk settled, making the room feel smaller, more confined. The clock's ticking grew louder in the silence. "Hey there," Michael's voice, too casual. "Caught me heading out. Everything okay?" "Fine," Derek said, the word catching on his lips that wouldn't stop trembling. "Just checking in." The lie tasted bitter, foreign on his tongue, after decades of straight talk between them. A memory surfaced, Michael's furrowed brow last Christmas, when Sarah had excused herself early from dinner. "She seems distant lately," he'd said, and Derek had dismissed it as holiday stress. The coffee mug on his desk had gone completely cold, a thin film forming on its surface. Derek's fingers traced the grain of the wooden desk, rough against his skin. The same desk where he'd taught his grandchildren to draw, where Sarah had paid their bills for 40 years. "You sure? You don't sound right," Michael pressed, a thread of concern winding through his words. Derek's gaze fell on a framed photo of Sarah at the Women's Association fundraiser last spring, beaming with pride as she announced record donations. The same organization whose statement now burned in his pocket. "When did you last see Sarah?" he asked, instead of answering, his voice steadier than he felt. A pause. Too long. "Book club meeting? Couple weeks back." "Why?" Another sob threatened, building in his chest, but Derek swallowed it down. The knock at the door had stopped. Whoever had been there had given up, or worse, decided to come back later. "Derek? What's going on?" Michael's voice sharpened with concern. His fist clenched, then came down hard on the desk, rattling the pens in their holder. "Nothing. I'll call tomorrow." He hung up before Michael could object, before his voice betrayed him completely. The house fell silent again, save for his ragged breathing and the merciless ticking of the grandfather clock. Derek pulled the statement from his pocket, smoothing its crumpled edge. The smudged figure, $15,000, altered to $18,000, stared back at him, the first thread in what he suspected was a larger deception. He moved to his filing cabinet, trying the drawer where he kept their financial records, locked. Since when did they lock things from each other? His reflection caught in the window glass, a man he barely recognized, eyes reddened, mouth set in a grim line. The doubt that had been a whisper now solidified into certainty. Something was very wrong, and it went beyond Sarah's sudden self-discovery trip to Bali. Whatever secrets lay behind that locked drawer, Derek knew, with the instinct honed by decades of financial investigation, that they would shatter the life he thought they'd built together. Evening had fully settled by the time Derek stepped into the backyard, seeking refuge in the cool air. The garden bench, weathered teak they'd purchased for their 30th anniversary, waited beneath the old maple tree. Its wooden slats creaked in familiar protest as he lowered himself onto its surface, the statement still clutched in his hand. The scent of Sarah's prized roses hung in the twilight air, a sweetness that now seemed to mock the bitterness spreading through him. A light breeze stirred the leaves overhead, whispering secrets he couldn't quite catch. The garden had always been their sanctuary, the place they retreated to when life's storms raged. Now it felt like foreign territory. Derek unfolded the statement again, eyes straining in the fading light. Beyond the altered figure he'd spotted earlier, other discrepancies began to emerge. Smaller amounts moved between accounts, dates that didn't align with the association's regular meeting schedule. His investigator's mind clicked into gear, despite the hollow ache in his chest. "How could you?" The words escaped in a choked whisper that scattered a nearby robin into flight. The last time he'd felt this betrayed was when his business partner had embezzled client funds 20 years ago. But this cut deeper into the bone of his existence. A memory surfaced. Sarah, 3 months ago, casually mentioning how she'd taken over all the online banking to save him the trouble. Her insistence that he needn't worry about their joint accounts anymore. The way she'd changed the passwords for security reasons. The sob that tore from his throat startled even himself. A raw, wounded sound that seemed to come from someone else entirely. He doubled over, the paper crinkling in his grip as tears fell onto the garden path below. A distant chill that had nothing to do with the evening air settled into his bones. The grandchildren's college funds, their retirement accounts. What else had she accessed? What else had she taken? And for what? The woman who'd shared his bed for 43 years was suddenly a stranger with secrets he couldn't fathom. Derek straightened slowly, wiping his face with a handkerchief. The paper in his hand, this single altered statement, was just the beginning. If his suspicions were correct, Sarah hadn't gone to Bali merely to find herself. She'd gone because something was unraveling, and she needed to escape before it all came crashing down. He read through the document once more, meticulously this time, his trained eye catching subtle patterns. The deposits matched withdrawals from their personal savings. He was certain of it, though he couldn't access the accounts to confirm. Not yet, anyway. Derek folded the statement and tucked it securely into his pocket. Tomorrow, he would begin a proper investigation. Tomorrow, he would start untangling whatever web Sarah had woven while he'd trusted blindly. A twig snapped in the darkness beyond the garden's edge. Derek's head jerked up, eyes narrowing as he peered into the shadows beneath the hedge. "Who's there?" he called, voice steadier than he expected. Silence answered him, but the prickling sensation between his shoulder blades told him he wasn't alone. Someone was watching. Someone who perhaps knew exactly what that statement in his pocket meant. Morning light filtered through the dusty window of the attic, illuminating dancing particles in its beam. Derek hadn't slept, his mind racing through possibilities while his heart ached with each new suspicion. The wooden beams creaked overhead as he moved carefully between stacked boxes and forgotten furniture, searching for answers in the one place Sarah rarely ventured. The old trunk in the corner, his personal archive from 40 years in financial investigation, waited like a loyal friend. Derek knelt before it, ignoring the protest in his knees, and lifted the heavy lid. The familiar scent of old paper and leather bindings greeted him, comforting in its constancy. "Let's see what you've been hiding, Sarah," he murmured, pulling out his laptop. He might be locked out of their online accounts, but he still had his methods. Old-school methods that had served him well before the digital age had transformed financial crimes. His brother's words from their call yesterday echoed in his mind. That pause before answering about Sarah, too long, too deliberate. Michael knew something. The question was how much. Derek dialed his number again, putting the phone on speaker while he pulled records from the trunk. "Twice in 24 hours. Must be a record," Michael answered, attempting lightness but missing by a mile. "I need to ask you something," Derek said, bypassing pleasantries. "And I need the truth." The silence stretched between them, heavy with unspoken knowledge. "How long have you suspected something was wrong with Sarah?" Derek finally asked, his voice steady despite the rage building in his chest. A sigh whistled through the phone. Suspected or known? The admission hit Derek like a physical blow. He gripped the edge of the trunk, knuckles whitening. "You knew." "And said nothing?" "I tried, Derek. Last Christmas, remember? You shut me down. Said I was imagining things." A hot tear slid down Derek's cheek before he could stop it. "What exactly do you know?" "Not the details, just patterns. The late nights at association meetings, the new friends she wouldn't introduce you to, the way she changed the subject whenever money came up." Derek's gaze fell on a photo album he'd unearthed from the trunk. He flipped it open, revealing pictures from their 30th anniversary cruise. Sarah smiling, her arm around his waist. The happiness in her eyes looked genuine. Had it been? Or had she been playing a role even then? "Why Bali?" Derek asked, the question that had gnawed at him since she'd announced her solo trip. Another pause. "She mentioned meeting someone there. A financial advisor," she said. The rage that had been simmering erupted in a sudden, violent movement. Derek slammed the album shut and hurled it across the attic. It hit the wall with a satisfying thud before falling open to a cascade of scattered memories. "Why you?" The words tore from his throat in a roar that shocked even him. "My own brother." "Derek, listen." "No, you listen," he interrupted, tears now streaming freely down his face. "While you were protecting her secrets, she was stealing from the Women's Association, embezzling Michael, and God knows what else." The silence that followed confirmed his suspicion. This, at least, Michael hadn't known. Derek wiped his face with trembling hands. "I need account statements. All of them. Bank, credit cards, investment portfolios. Everything from the past year." "You think she's been—" "I don't think. I know." Derek cut him off, already pulling another box toward him. "The question is how much and where it went, and who else might be involved." As he hung up, Derek noticed a flash of white beneath a stack of old tax returns. He pulled it out. An unfamiliar credit card statement addressed to Sarah at a P.O.'d box he'd never heard of. His stomach clenched as he scanned the charges. Luxury hotels in Singapore, Jakarta, and Bangkok, all dated months before her sudden Bali trip. The most recent statement showed room charges for 2 people. The papers slipped from his grasp, scattering across the attic floor, as another name caught his eye on a hotel reservation confirmation. Someone named David Chen sharing a suite with his wife in Bali. Derek sat back on his heels, a cold numbness spreading through him that had nothing to do with the attic's chill. The betrayal wasn't just financial. It wasn't just about money. She'd been planning this for months, with someone else. The flickering bulb overhead seemed to dim as the full weight of discovery pressed down on him. In the shadows of the attic, surrounded by the debris of their shared history, Derek allowed himself one final, heaving sob before the investigator in him took control. Now he knew what he was looking for, and he wouldn't stop until he had every piece of evidence needed to confront the stranger who had once been his wife. 3 days of relentless investigation had left Derek hollow-eyed and exhausted. The evidence folder lay beside him on the cold park bench, thick with printouts, statements, and handwritten notes. The morning crowd had thinned, leaving him alone with his thoughts and the rustling leaves overhead. The air carried a hint of coming rain, matching his darkening mood. Derek had chosen this public park, neutral ground, far from the memories that haunted every corner of his home. The concrete path before him still bore chalk drawings from children long gone home, fading outlines that reminded him of his own diminishing certainty. Everything he'd discovered pointed to a devastating conclusion. Sarah had methodically emptied their accounts over the past 8 months, transferring funds through a complex web of transactions. The Women's Association was just the beginning. Nearly $40,000 missing there. But their retirement accounts, the grandchildren's college funds, their joint savings, all significantly depleted. And then there was David Chen. The hotel receipts, the dinner reservations for 2, the jewelry purchases in foreign currencies. The betrayal was complete. Personal and financial threads woven into a tapestry of deception so thorough it staggered him. Derek pulled out his phone, scrolling to the text he'd received from the bank that morning. His request to freeze the accounts had been denied. Sarah had removed his name as an authorized user months ago. The words blurred as fresh tears threatened. A jogger passed, casting a curious glance his way. Derek nodded automatically, the social mask slipping into place with practiced ease. The folder slid from his lap, papers scattering across the damp ground. "Damn it," he muttered, dropping to his knees to gather them before the strengthening breeze could carry them away. His fingers fumbled, suddenly clumsy with fatigue and emotion. A critical page, the one showing transfers to an offshore account, slipped beneath the bench. As he reached for it, his phone buzzed with a call from Michael. "I'm at the bank," his brother said without preamble. "It's worse than we thought. She's liquidated the investment portfolio, too." Something inside Derek, some final pillar of strength, crumbled. The hollow ache in his chest expanded until breathing became painful. "All of it?" he managed, his voice barely audible. "Nearly. And Derek, she's changed her beneficiary designations on everything." The paper in his hand shook violently as the full implications crashed over him. Not just theft and infidelity, but a complete erasure of their life together, as if 43 years meant nothing, as if he meant nothing. "I've lost it all," Derek whispered, not sure if he was speaking to Michael or to himself. The first heavy raindrop landed on the paper, blurring the damning figures. "Everything we built." The sobs came without warning, violent, heaving cries that bent him double on the park bench. The folder slipped completely from his grasp, papers swirling away in the sudden gust of wind and rain. Derek made no move to retrieve them, his body surrendering to the storm both outside and within. Has betrayal ever left you broken like this? Share your story below, like if you've felt this pain. Follow to see if Derek finds the strength to rebuild when everything is lost. A passerby slowed, concern etched on her weathered face. "Sir, are you all right?" Derek couldn't answer, couldn't find words to explain the devastation of discovering your life partner had methodically dismantled your shared existence. The woman hesitated, then continued on her way, leaving him alone with his grief. Michael's voice still called from the phone, now lying forgotten on the bench. Derek couldn't bring himself to pick it up, to continue the conversation, to face one more revelation. What more could there possibly be to lose? The rain fell harder now, soaking through his jacket, plastering his silver hair to his forehead. He made no move to seek shelter, welcoming the cold that matched the emptiness spreading inside him. Some of the papers, evidence of Sarah's betrayal, dissolved in the downpour, ink running in blurry streams across white surfaces, like his memories of her, like his trust, like his future. A text message alert cut through his despair. Unknown number, foreign area code. With trembling fingers, Derek opened it to find a photo. Sarah on a beach, smiling, her arm around a younger man. The timestamp, yesterday. The location tag, Seminyak, Bali. The phone slipped from his grasp, clattering to the wet pavement, as Derek collapsed further into himself, overcome by a wave of despair so profound it felt like drowning. The office looked exactly as he'd left it 5 years ago. Worn leather chair, walnut desk with its familiar scratch along the right edge, walls lined with financial textbooks and framed credentials. Martin Walsh, Derek's former partner, leaned back and studied him with concern etched in the deep lines of his face. "You look like hell, old friend." Derek managed a grim smile, running a hand through his still damp hair. After his breakdown in the park, he'd pulled himself together just enough to make this appointment, a decision born of desperation and a flicker of professional pride that refused to be extinguished. "Feel worse," he admitted, the scent of paper and ink bringing back decades of casework. The office window overlooked the financial district where he'd spent his career uncovering other people's frauds. The irony wasn't lost on him. Martin pushed a steaming cup of coffee across the desk. "So, walk me through it again, systematically this time." Derek took a deep breath, forcing his personal anguish aside. This was familiar territory. Analyzing financial crimes had been his life's work. He could do this, even when the criminal was his wife. 8 months of strategic withdrawals, he began, his voice steadying as he slipped into investigator mode. Small enough to avoid automatic flags. The Women's Association was just practice, building confidence before hitting our personal accounts. Martin nodded, taking notes in his precise handwriting. "And the offshore transfers?" "Cayman Islands, 3 separate accounts." A tear threatened, but Derek blinked it away. "She's been planning this for over a year, Martin." "And this Chen character?" The name still felt like a knife twist, but Derek continued. "Investment advisor, supposedly 38 years old. They met at a financial seminar last spring, one she never mentioned attending." Martin's pen stopped moving. He looked up, meeting Derek's gaze directly. "You know what this is, right? Classic sweetheart scam, targeted at her age demographic. The suggestion should have brought relief, that Sarah was a victim too, not just a perpetrator. Instead, it twisted the knife deeper. She's not some vulnerable widow, Martin. She's a chartered accountant. She knew exactly what she was doing." A memory surfaced. Sarah laughing at his insistence on reviewing their finances quarterly. "You and your systems," she teased. "Some things need spontaneity, Derek." Had she been laying groundwork even then? "Either way," Martin continued, "we have options. The good news is I still have contacts at the Financial Crimes Unit." For the first time in days, something like hope flickered in Derek's chest. He gripped his coffee cup, the warmth seeping into his cold fingers. "You think we can recover any of it?" "Some, not all." Martin leaned forward. "But Derek, you need to be prepared. This goes public. Everything comes out. The affairs, the embezzlement from the Women's Association, all of it." The grandchildren's faces flashed in his mind. Innocent, adoring. What would this do to them? To the family name he and Sarah had built over decades? A single tear escaped, tracking down his weathered cheek. He wiped it away with determination. "So be it." Martin nodded, reaching for his phone. "I'll make the calls. In the meantime, I need you to do what you do best. Build the case. Every transaction, every date, every discrepancy. Leave nothing to chance." The familiar challenge steadied Derek. This he could do. This had always been his strength, meticulous investigation, finding patterns others missed, building airtight cases. "There's something else," Derek said. pulling a folder from his briefcase. "The Women's Association treasurer contacted me yesterday. Apparently, she's been keeping her own records, separate from the official ones Sarah maintained." Martin raised an eyebrow, taking the folder. Smart woman. She had suspicions for months, but no proof. Until now. Derek felt a surge of validation as Martin scanned the documents, whistling softly. "This is good, Derek. Really good." For the first time since finding that first altered statement, Derek felt the fog of despair lifting slightly. The path forward was difficult but clear. He wouldn't face Sarah directly, wouldn't give her the satisfaction of seeing his pain. He would let the evidence speak for itself through proper channels. "I want it all documented," he said, his voice firm with newfound resolve. "Everything she took, everyone she deceived, and then I want to be gone before she returns." Martin looked up sharply. "Gone? Where?" A memory surfaced. His semester abroad in Barcelona decades ago, before meeting Sarah, before responsibilities anchored him to one place. The freedom he'd felt, the possibilities that had stretched before him. "Spain," Derek said, surprising himself with the certainty in his voice. "I still have contacts there, and nothing left to keep me here." He picked up a pen from Martin's desk, its weight familiar and reassuring in his hand. The tears that had nearly overwhelmed him in the park were now replaced by something stronger, determination born of betrayal, but carrying the seeds of liberation. "Let's get to work," he said, meeting his old friend's gaze. "I have a life to reclaim." The courthouse loomed before Derek, its stone facade imposing against the morning sky. He gripped the leather portfolio containing weeks of methodical investigation, every transaction traced, every deception documented. The evidence had grown from a single altered statement to a comprehensive case file that would leave no room for doubt or denial. "You ready for this?" Martin asked, adjusting his tie as they approached the wide steps. Derek nodded, feeling oddly calm. The emotional storm that had nearly destroyed him in the park had given way to something more powerful, a quiet determination that straightened his spine and steadied his hands. The portfolio represented more than just evidence. It was his reclamation of dignity. Have you ever had to make the hardest choice of your life? Comment your story below. Like if you believe in justice over vengeance, follow to see if Derek's courage is rewarded in the end. "Financial Crimes is sending Detective Alvarez," Martin said as they climbed the steps. "She's good, thorough. Won't let anything slip through the cracks." The marble lobby echoed with footsteps and hushed conversations. Derek's reflection caught in the polished surfaces, silver-haired, lines etched deeper by recent events, but standing tall. He barely recognized himself, this man who had emerged from the ruins of betrayal. A memory surfaced, his father's voice from decades ago. "A man's true character isn't revealed when things go right, son. It's what he does when everything falls apart." Derek had been 16 then, too young to understand the weight of those words. Now, at 65, they resonated in his bones. Detective Alvarez met them in a small conference room, her no-nonsense demeanor immediately putting Derek at ease. She was perhaps 50, with intelligent eyes that missed nothing and a handshake that conveyed competence. "Mr. Walsh briefed me," she said, gesturing for them to sit. "But I'd like to hear it from you, Mr. Miller." Derek's throat tightened momentarily as he placed the portfolio on the table. "My wife, Sarah Miller, has systematically embezzled funds from the Women's Association, where she served as treasurer, as well as depleting our joint accounts and investment portfolios." His voice caught slightly, but he pushed through. "The total amount exceeds $300,000. transferred through various channels to offshore accounts. Additionally, there's evidence of identity theft and fraud related to credit applications and beneficiary designations. Alvarez's eyebrows rose slightly as she opened the portfolio, scanning the meticulously organized evidence. "And you've compiled all this yourself?" "Financial investigation was my profession for 40 years, Derek replied, a hint of pride cutting through the pain. "These methods were once my daily work." A tear threatened, surprising him with its sudden appearance. Not for Sarah or the lost money, but for the bittersweet validation that his skills, the very expertise she had dismissed as boring and unnecessary, had ultimately revealed her deception. Alvarez nodded, impressed. "This is exceptional work, Mr. Miller, more thorough than what we typically receive." "There's something else," Derek said, hesitating before continuing. "My wife is currently in Bali with a man named David Chen. I believe he may be involved in similar schemes targeting other women." The detective's expression sharpened. "International dimension complicates things, but doesn't make it impossible." She pulled out a recorder. "Let's make this official." For the next hour, Derek provided his statement. Dates, amounts, methods, every detail recalled with precision, born of both professional training and personal betrayal. Each word distanced him further from the devastation he'd felt in the park, replacing it with the clarity of purpose. "And you understand once we proceed, there's no turning back?" Alvarez asked as they concluded. "Criminal charges will be filed. This becomes public record." Derek nodded, his decision made long before entering the courthouse. "I understand. What about your wife's return date?" 3 days from now," Derek replied, his voice steady despite the slight tremor in his hands. "I won't be here." Alvarez looked up sharply. "You're leaving?" Martin interjected. "Derek has made arrangements to relocate temporarily. All contact information has been provided." The detective studied Derek for a moment. "Unusual, but not problematic from our perspective, as long as you're available for testimony if needed." As they finished, Alvarez gathered the evidence into an official case file. The simple act of transferring the portfolio, watching his personal tragedy transform into case number FC 2025-0734, brought unexpected relief. "We'll move quickly," she assured him, standing to shake his hand. "Thank you for your cooperation, Mr. Miller." In the courthouse hallway, sunlight streamed through tall windows, casting long shadows across the marble floor. Derek paused, overwhelmed by the finality of what he'd just done. "You okay?" Martin asked quietly. "I will be," Derek replied, surprising himself with the truth in those words. Outside, the city continued its rhythm, oblivious to the life-altering decision he'd just made. His phone vibrated with a message from Michael. "Flight confirmed. Barcelona, Saturday morning." Derek looked up at the sky, feeling the weight of the portfolio, now empty, in his hands. The evidence was gone, submitted to proper authorities who would ensure justice, not vengeance, but justice. For the first time in weeks, he took a deep breath that didn't catch on grief. The air tasted different somehow, like possibility, like freedom. 3 days from now, Sarah would return to empty accounts, criminal charges, and a house without him. She would find only a single letter explaining that just as she had erased him from her life in Bali, he had chosen to erase himself from hers. His steps lightened as he descended the courthouse stairs. The next chapter was waiting to be written, in Barcelona, in Spanish, in a language of renewal that belonged solely to him. The Barcelona airport buzzed with activity as Derek collected his single suitcase from the carousel. Sunlight streamed through massive windows, casting warm patterns across the terminal floor. He checked his watch. In 12 hours, Sarah's flight would land in Seattle, where Detective Alvarez would be waiting instead of a welcoming husband. His phone vibrated with a text from Martin. Everything proceeding as planned. Safe travels. Derek allowed himself a small smile, the first that had felt genuine in weeks. The 7-hour flight had given him time to reflect on the swift, decisive actions of the past 3 days. The evidence handed over, accounts documented, belongings packed and shipped, house keys left with Michael. His old life methodically dismantled, much as Sarah had dismantled their finances. The difference was he had left nothing to chance. Outside the terminal, Mediterranean air washed over him, warm, fragrant with unfamiliar spices and possibilities. The taxi driver nodded at the address Derek showed him, written in careful Spanish, practiced during sleepless nights. Barrio Gótico, the driver confirmed. Hermoso lugar. Beautiful place. As they wove through Barcelona's vibrant streets, Derek's phone chimed again. This time, an email notification from Detective Alvarez. Warrant executed. Association records secured. He exhaled slowly, picturing the scene at the Women's Association office. Police gathering financial documents, questioning board members, the treasurer finally vindicated in her suspicions. The carefully constructed facade of Sarah's life crumbling in her absence. As the taxi turned onto a narrow cobblestone street, buildings with ornate balconies rising on either side. This part of the city had stood for centuries, weathering wars and regimes while retaining its essential character. There was something comforting in that permanence, a reminder that life continued despite personal catastrophes. Aquí estamos, the driver announced, stopping before a restored building with a heavy wooden door. Your new home, senor. Home. The word caught in Derek's throat as he paid the fare. Could anywhere feel like home again after what had happened? Miguel, the property manager, greeted him warmly at the door. Senor Miller, welcome, welcome. Your brother explained everything. The apartment is ready for you. The space was modest but charming. High ceilings, restored tile floors, windows overlooking a small plaza where afternoon shadows played across ancient stones. The furniture was simple, nothing like the carefully curated pieces Sarah had insisted upon for their Seattle house. It's perfect, Derek said, surprised to find he meant it. After Miguel left, Derek stood alone in the quiet apartment. The distant sounds of street musicians floating through open windows, 7,000 miles from the betrayal that had shattered his world, 7,000 miles from the courthouse where, at this moment, the legal machinery was grinding into motion. His phone rang, Michael's name on the screen. You made it, his brother said, relief evident in his voice. How's the apartment? Good. Different. Needed different. Derek moved to the balcony, watching an elderly couple stroll arm in arm across the plaza below. Any word about Sarah? That's why I'm calling. Michael paused, the silence heavy with unspoken news. Her flight landed early. Alvarez was waiting at customs with the warrant. Derek gripped the iron railing, knuckles whitening. In his mind's eye, he could see it clearly. Sarah's confident smile fading as uniformed officers approached, the confusion giving way to panic as handcuffs clicked into place. There's more, Michael continued. Chen wasn't with her. According to Alvarez, they'd separated in Singapore. He cleaned out their shared account and disappeared. A bitter laugh escaped Derek's lips before he could stop it. Poetic justice. The betrayer betrayed. Did she say anything? Asked for you. Alvarez gave her your letter instead. The letter. 4 pages that had taken hours to write, detailing not the pain or rage, but the simple, devastating facts of what he'd discovered and the evidence he'd compiled. No accusations, no recriminations. Just the truth she'd tried so hard to hide, presented with the same methodical precision she'd always dismissed as boring. "The press got wind of it," Michael added. "Sarah Miller, prominent accountant, arrested for embezzlement and fraud." "It's already hitting the local news." Derek closed his eyes, feeling not the satisfaction he'd expected, but a complicated mixture of vindication and grief. 43 years of marriage, ending not with retirement celebrations and grandchildren's graduations, but with criminal charges and public humiliation. "The Women's Association president called," Michael continued. "She wanted to thank you. Said your evidence saved them from complete financial ruin." A weight Derek hadn't realized he was carrying seemed to lift slightly. His actions hadn't just been about personal justice. They'd protected others, preserved an organization that served the community. "There's something else," Michael said, his tone shifting. "The treasurer, Ellen Nichols, she'd been building her own case file. Had been for months. She was days away from going to the board when you contacted her." Ellen, quiet, meticulous Ellen, whom Sarah had often mocked for her obsessive attention to detail. The irony wasn't lost on Derek. "The grandkids are asking questions," Michael added softly. "Lisa and Tom are trying to shield them, but—" "Tell them the truth," Derek said firmly. "Age appropriate, but truth, no more lies." As the call ended, evening had fallen over Barcelona. Lights twinkled in the plaza below. A guitarist played something haunting and beautiful. Derek stood watching, feeling strangely untethered from the life he'd left behind. His phone chimed one final time, a news alert with Sarah's booking photo. He hesitated, then opened it. The image showed a woman he barely recognized, makeup-free, hollow-eyed, the confident smile replaced by stunned disbelief. For a moment, grief threatened to overwhelm him again, not for what he'd lost, but for what had never truly existed. Derek closed the alert without reading the accompanying article. Whatever happened next, the trial, the sentencing, the inevitable media coverage, would unfold without his presence. He had given the authorities everything they needed. Justice would take its course. He turned from the balcony and surveyed his new apartment, empty of shared history, but full of possibility. On the small writing desk lay a Spanish language book and a notebook ready for his first lesson tomorrow. In Seattle, Sarah faced the consequences of her choices. In Barcelona, Derek faced something altogether different. A future entirely his own, built from the ashes of betrayal but unburdened by its weight. For the first time since finding that altered statement, he felt not just the absence of pain, but the presence of something new. Freedom. Chapter 9. The Renewal. 6 months had transformed Derek's small Barcelona apartment into a home. Books in Spanish lined the shelves, local art brightened walls that had once been bare, and the balcony now hosted terracotta pots of herbs that perfumed the evening air. As he settled into his favorite chair, a worn leather piece nothing like the pristine furniture Sarah had insisted upon, the golden Spanish sunset cast long shadows across his new life. The laptop on the small writing desk displayed an email from Martin, the latest update in what had become a monthly ritual. Derek sipped his coffee, savoring both the rich local blend and the distance, emotional and geographical, from the events unfolding across the ocean. "Trial date set for January," Martin had written. "Prosecution has an airtight case thanks to your documentation. Sarah's attorney is pushing for a plea deal, but the DA isn't budging given the amounts involved and the betrayal of the Women's Association. Chen remains in the wind, last spotted in Jakarta. Interpol has been notified." Derek scrolled further, past the legal details to the personal note at the end. The grandkids asked about you again. When you're ready, they'd love a video call. A familiar ache bloomed in his chest, not the shattering pain of 6 months ago, but something softer, more bittersweet. He missed them desperately. Mia's gap-toothed smile, Tyler's serious questions, little Emma's spontaneous hugs. They were innocent casualties in a war they hadn't even known was being waged. From the kitchen shelf, their framed photo watched over his quiet evenings. Unlike the other remnants of his past life, this one he had carried with him, a reminder that some bonds remained unbroken despite everything that had crumbled. The doorbell chimed, interrupting his reverie. Derek marked the time, exactly 7 o'clock. Isabel was nothing if not punctual. "Buenas noches, Professor." She greeted him with the customary kiss on each cheek, her silver-streaked dark hair caught in a simple clip. At 62, the retired literature professor had become his language tutor, cultural guide, and increasingly friend. "Your Spanish has improved tremendously," she noted, settling at the small dining table where he had laid out simple tapas. "Soon you won't need these lessons at all." Derek smiled, pouring her a glass of local wine. "Then I'll have to find another excuse for these evenings." The words surprised him, the easy flirtation so foreign to the man he'd been 6 months ago, wounded and wary. Isabel's answering smile, warm and unrushed, suggested she didn't mind this evolution. "I brought something for you," she said, pulling a book from her bag. "Garcia Marquez. Challenging, but I think you're ready." Their fingers brushed as she handed him the volume, the brief contact sending a warmth through him that had nothing to do with the evening temperature. This, too, was new. The realization that he was not merely existing in the aftermath of betrayal, but beginning to live again. After Isabel left, promising to return for a concert in the plaza the following evening, Derek returned to Martin's email. The cursor hovered over the reply button as he considered what to say about the grandchildren. His phone rang, Michael's name appearing on the screen. "Perfect timing," Derek answered. "I was just thinking about you." "Great minds," Michael replied. "How's Barcelona treating you?" "Better than I deserve, probably." Derek moved to the balcony, watching as the plaza below came alive with evening strollers. "Got Martin's update about the trial. That's actually why I'm calling." Michael's tone shifted slightly. "Sarah's asking to see you." The request landed like a stone in still water, ripples of emotion spreading outward. "Why?" Derek managed, his voice steady despite the sudden tightness in his chest. "Her attorney thinks a face-to-face might help her case somehow. Show remorse, maybe." "I told her attorney it was unlikely, but I promised I'd relay the message." Derek watched an elderly couple cross the plaza below, walking arm in arm with the comfortable synchronicity of decades together. Once, he had imagined that future for himself and Sarah. "No," he said finally. "Whatever she wants to say, she can put it in a letter. I've moved on." The truth in those words surprised him. He had moved on. Not completely, not without scars, but genuinely forward into a life that increasingly belonged to him alone. "I figured as much," Michael said. "For what it's worth, I think it's the right call. Clean break." After they hung up, Derek opened the carved wooden box on his bookshelf, the one possession from his office he'd brought to Spain. Inside lay his old wedding ring, removed the day he'd handed the evidence to Detective Alvarez. He hadn't looked at it since arriving in Barcelona. The gold band caught the last rays of sunset, gleaming with memories of a life that now seemed to belong to someone else. 43 years of marriage encapsulated in a circle of metal that had once represented endless love and now symbolized nothing but broken promises. Derek closed the box with a decisive click. Some artifacts of the past needed to be acknowledged, but not dwelled upon. His laptop chimed with a new email, not from Martin this time, but from Ellen Nichols, the Women's Association treasurer whose separate investigation had corroborated his own. "Thought you might want to see this," she wrote. The association voted unanimously to establish a scholarship fund for women re-entering the workforce after setbacks. They're naming it after you, the Derek Miller Resilience Scholarship. Your actions saved our organization and inspired us to help others rebuild. Would love your blessing on this. Tears welled unexpectedly, blurring the screen. Here was something Sarah hadn't managed to destroy. His legacy of integrity, his professional reputation, his impact on a community he'd thought lost to him forever. With steady fingers, he typed his reply. "The honor is mine. Please use the enclosed donation to fund the first scholarship." He added his Spanish bank details and a generous sum that would have been impossible 6 months ago before the courts had frozen Sarah's accounts and recovered a significant portion of their joint assets. As night fell over Barcelona, Derek returned to the balcony with Garcia Marquez's novel and a glass of Spanish brandy. Street musicians in the plaza below played something soulful and complex, the melody rising to meet him like an old friend. He thought about the video call with his grandchildren that he would finally arrange tomorrow, about Isabel and their concert plans, about the Spanish cooking class he'd enrolled in for the following week, about the man he was becoming, not despite the betrayal, but in some ways because of it. His phone lit up with one final message of the day. A photo from Michael of Mia's school art project, a colorful drawing of a man with silver hair standing on a balcony, Spanish flags and music notes floating around him. For Grandpa in Spain, the childish handwriting proclaimed, "We miss you, but Mom says you're having a big adventure." Derek traced the drawing with his fingertip, tears flowing freely now, not the devastating sobs of the park bench or the bitter tears of the attic discovery, but something healing and hopeful. Yes, he whispered to the night air, to the vibrant city that had embraced him, to the future stretching before him. "I am." In his mind's eye, he could see Sarah sitting in her prison cell, facing the consequences of her choices. He could picture David Chen, perpetually looking over his shoulder as Interpol closed in. Their lives defined by deception, by what they had taken from others. His life, by contrast, was increasingly defined by what he was building for himself. A new home, new friendships, new purpose, new joy found in simple pleasures, a language mastered, a meal shared, music in a moonlit plaza. The final page of this chapter was writing itself in possibilities rather than regrets. Derek opened the novel Isabel had brought him, the Spanish words no longer foreign but welcoming. Beyond the betrayal that had nearly broken him lay a truth he was only now beginning to fully grasp. Sometimes freedom comes disguised as devastation. Sometimes the end of one story is merely the necessary prelude to a better one. And sometimes a man of 65 discovers that his most authentic life is waiting patiently on the other side of heartbreak, ready to begin when he is. The Spanish sunset painted Barcelona's skyline in hues of amber and gold as Derek stood on his balcony, watching evening descend on the plaza below. 6 months had passed since he'd handed that evidence folder to Detective Alvarez. 6 months since he'd walked away from 43 years of marriage and the ruins of a life built on what he now understood had been shifting sand. Sarah's trial was approaching, her attorney still pushing for a plea deal that seemed increasingly unlikely as the full extent of her crimes came to light. David Chen remained elusive, though Interpol had tracked him through Singapore and Jakarta, always one step behind the man who had first encouraged Sarah's betrayal and then betrayed her in turn. Poetic justice, Michael had called it during their last phone call. Derek wasn't sure he'd go that far, but he understood the symmetry. The evening breeze carried the scent of garlic and olive oil from the restaurant below, mingling with the fragrance of the potted herbs he'd planted when Isabel suggested he needed something to nurture. The retired literature professor had become more than a language tutor in recent months. Her wisdom and warmth, a surprising gift. In this chapter he'd never anticipated writing. Derek's fingers traced the spine of the Garcia Marquez novel she'd given him, his improved Spanish making the complex prose accessible in ways he couldn't have imagined half a year ago. Learning a new language at 65 had seemed daunting at first, but now felt emblematic of everything else he was discovering. It's never too late to begin again. From inside the apartment, his laptop chimed with an incoming video call. Derek smiled, knowing it would be Mia and Tyler, eager to show him their school projects and pepper him with questions about Spain. These weekly calls had become a lifeline, a reminder that while Sarah had betrayed him, the bonds with his grandchildren remained unbreakable. Last week, Mia had asked the question he'd been dreading. "Grandpa, are you and Grandma ever getting back together?" He'd found himself answering with unexpected clarity. "No, sweetheart. Sometimes when trust is broken, the kindest thing people can do is wish each other well from a distance." The wisdom had surprised him, not because it wasn't true, but because he genuinely meant it. The rage that had fueled those early days of investigation had mellowed into something more nuanced, an acknowledgement that Sarah's choices, while devastating, had ultimately freed him to discover parts of himself long dormant. On his writing desk lay the brochure for a Mediterranean cruise he'd booked for the following month, a solo journey to Greece and Turkey, countries he'd always wanted to explore. Beside it sat an invitation to join Barcelona's Expatriate Community Book Club, and a business card from a local accounting firm that had approached him about consulting work. Life was offering possibilities again, doors opening where he'd once seen only walls. Derek took a final glance at the setting sun before turning to answer his grandchildren's call. The man who had arrived in Barcelona 6 months ago, hollow-eyed and grief-stricken, would hardly recognize the person he was becoming. Someone who had learned that resilience isn't about pretending the wound never happened, but about carrying it forward with grace, allowing it to inform but not define the journey ahead. The painful ending of his marriage had proven to be more than just an ending. It was, quite unexpectedly, a beginning as well, a doorway to authenticity he might never have found otherwise. As he settled before the screen to greet Mia's gap-toothed smile and Tyler's serious eyes, Derek felt something that had been absent in those dark days of discovery and despair: gratitude. Not for the betrayal itself, but for the strength he'd found in its aftermath, and for the realization that had become his guiding truth. It's never too late to start again. It's never too late to become the person you were meant to be all along.